If you enjoy this video, please remember to like and subscribe, and if you would like to support the channel on Patreon or PayPal, the links are listed below. Rebel Without a Cause is the 1955 teenage drama directed by Nicholas Ray and starring James Dean, Natalie Wood and Sal Mineo. This was James Dean's second major film role. Dean plays Jim Stark, a troubled teenager who is the new kid in town. He makes friends with a troubled young man named Plato, played by Sal Mineo, who is practically raised by the housemaid. Jim, without prejudice, accepts young Plato and takes on the role as a father figure for young Plato. Natalie Wood plays Judy, who craves attention, especially from her father. She gets involved with the wrong crowd, hanging out with a gang of juvenile delinquents. She draws close to Jim, and through a number of events, the three band together. The Rebel Without a Cause project began when director Nicholas Ray admitted a 20-page treatment to Warner Brothers. Blind Run. The studio offered $5,000 for the script. Nicholas Ray collaborated with author Leon Uris, but it didn't work out, and Uris left the project. Writer Irving Shulman entered the project and contributed a few things to the film. Shulman was then replaced by Stuart Stern, who completed the final version of the script. There were a number of actors considered for the part of Jim Stark, including Tab Hunter and Marlon Brando, who had just done The Wild One a year earlier. Brando actually did the screen test for Rebel Without a Cause in 1947, long before Rebel Without a Cause was made.
I'm back, though. Listen, what's Tony and Riggs been cooking up?
Some job they want to pull. Why are you glad you're back?
If we could get a boat going down the river, it wouldn't cost us anything, and we could go to another town and live.
The script was adapted to the screen from the book Rebel Without a Cause, The Hypnoanalysis of a Criminal Psychopath by Robert M. Lindner. But the book only inspired the original title of the film and in no way represents what the film is about. Interesting to note that the novelization of the film was written by Irving Shulman but titled Children of the Dark. After the success of Elia Kazan's film East of Eden, starring James Dean, Dean was cast in Rebel Without a Cause. Here is the screen test he did with the other actors, Corey Allen and a very young Dennis Hopper. It was blind luck that James Dean was available for the role of Jim. He was under contract to star in the film Giant, but due to Elizabeth Taylor's pregnancy, the film was postponed, so Dean had plenty of time to make Rebel Without a Cause.
He was back in Hollywood beginning work on his second film, this time with director Nicholas Ray, the film Rebel Without a Cause.
When I went out to New York to spend the week with him and my son to see how he would relate to the kid younger than himself, he had resolved. Well, when we made the handshake agreement on 15 pages, he said, look, I want to make a film with you. I want to make this film with you. But don't tell those bastards out there.
Before filming began, Nicholas Ray went to a lot of effort to get to know Jimmy. This is what director Nicholas Ray said about Jimmy. I wanted to find out all about this guy. I ran around with him. We got drunk a number of times. By that time, we were ready to work together. I knew he had to play the part because he could do it like no one else. I knew to play the role of Jim Stark. Natalie Wood was cast, but she was not the first choice of director Ray. A number of actresses were tested, like Debbie Reynolds and Jane Mansfield, but he couldn't find his Judy. Natalie Wood was in fact a child star who made her debut in the film Miracle on 34th Street. According to the Natalie Wood biography, she didn't get the role originally because Nicholas Ray didn't think she could play the role of a wild teen character. While Natalie Wood was having a night out with friends, she got involved in a car accident. When Ray heard of this, he rushed to the hospital to see her. While in delirium, she overheard the doctors calling her a goddamn juvenile delinquent. She yelled out, "Did you hear what he called me, Nick? He called me a goddamn juvenile delinquent. So do I get the part?"
I became sort of rebellious at that age, and I really fell in love with that part and wanted to do it very badly, and got into a big fight with my parents because they didn't want me to do it because the picture was sort of against parents and all of that. So I threatened to run away from home and become an actual juvenile delinquent unless I was given the chance to test for the part. On the very last day of filming, Nick Ray realized that he didn't ever have a close-up of James Dean and myself in the love scene, in which I say, you know, Jimmy, I love you. And the welfare worker came over and said, oh no, time's up, you know, she can't work anymore today. So my mother took this fellow aside, and she had put a amount of money in an envelope, and she said, well, Natalie has got her schooling in now, hasn't she?
Sal Mineo was cast as Plato. This was his debut role. He even received an Academy Award nomination for the role. After Rebel Without a Cause, his popularity grew. He would go on to star alongside Paul Newman in Somebody Up There Likes Me. The role, played by Paul Newman in that movie, was supposed to be for James Dean, but he sadly died before the making of that film. He also starred in Giant, the other James Dean film, and the Gene Krupa story, An Exodus, with Paul Newman and Eva Marie Saint. Character actor Jim Backus played the role of Frank, the weak father of Jim. He is mostly known for playing Mr. Magoo in the animated cartoon series. And of course, we all know him for playing the millionaire, Mr. Thurston Howe, on the comedy series Gilligan's Island. Other notables in the film: Corey Allen, who played Buzz Gunderson, the leader of the gang of delinquents, who has it in for Jim. He is mostly known for his TV work. A young Dennis Hopper played one of the gang members. This was Hopper's first major role. Hopper was heavily influenced by James Dean.
And then you came out to Hollywood. You lived in Kansas, right? You grew up there?
I grew up in Dodge City and then Kansas City, Missouri when my father came back from the war. And then we moved to San Diego, California. And then when I was 18, I came to Los Angeles and I went into contract with Warner Brothers. Until I saw James Dean at 18, I knew that I was the best actor pound for pound anywhere in the world, young actor in my mind, that I was convinced of that, till I saw Dean work. And he was doing things that was totally out of my league. I had no idea. I had done Shakespeare at the Old Globe Theater. My background was classical, and I gave great line readings and appeared to be very natural and very naturalistic. But it was all preconceived. It was all like thought out things. And I saw Dean improvising and doing things that were just not on the printed page, and I didn't know what he was doing, and he was doing it different every time. So finally I'd had it on the Chicky run, and he wouldn't talk to me, so I grabbed him and I threw him into a car. And I threatened him. Into a car, and I threatened him and so on, to tell him that I was the best young actor, but he was better, and I had to know what he was doing or else, you know?
Yeah.
And so he calmed me down, and he said, well, you've got to start doing things and not showing them. And I said, well, I don't know, what does that mean, do something and don't show it? And he said, well, if you're drinking a cup of coffee, you got to just drink the coffee, not act drinking the coffee. You've got to really drink the coffee. And he said it'll be very difficult at first because you'll be very self-conscious about it. But you know, you just got to drink it. Or if you're smoking a cigarette, you got to smoke the cigarette, not act smoking the cigarette.
After Rebel Without a Cause, director Nicholas Ray directed the dark western Johnny Guitar, starring Joan Crawford and Sterling Hayden. He directed Bigger Than Life, which starred James Mason as a drug-addicted father who compromises the safety of his own family. The film was a big flop, but it is now hailed as a masterpiece by film critics and film fans. Nicholas Ray was also an important influence on New Wave French cinema. Rebel Without a Cause started production on March the 28th until May the 25th of 1955. Warner Brothers originally considered the film a B-movie project, and the film was shot in black and white film stock. When studio boss Jack Warner realized James Dean was their new rising star and hot property, the film was swapped to color stock.
When you first read a script and know that you will be playing a given character, does it come to life on the screen very much as you first envision it?
Oh, no, not at all. The character that you usually see is sporadic nature. He's too fantastic for reality. He does many things that the character shouldn't do, and you have to select and constantly reevaluate your images, as you say, as what you envision as the character.
During the shoot, Nicholas Ray was inseparable from his 3 stars, Natalie Wood, James Dean, and Sal Mineo. Ray started to realise James Dean's power to touch audiences, and he gave James Dean free rein to improvise his own scenes.
Two of them together, Nick Ray and Jimmy Dean, gave us an atmosphere to work in that was really wonderful. I mean, we were all scared and terrified. It was really my first big movie, and I think most of us. And it was such a warm family together working that you felt very comfortable.
I didn't feel that he was projecting his vulnerability. I think that Jimmy was one of the first people in our business to share his vulnerability. And to say, hey, you know, I have a hump on my back, and the best I can do is share that with you, and I'm willing to. And I think that's why we identified with him, because every one of us has a hump on his back somewhere.
Anne Duran, who played Dean's mother in the film, was blown away by James Dean and stated Jimmy did most of the directing. He gave us our lines. He dominated entire scenes and directed. Nicholas Ray seemed to be mesmerised by this.
There was a scene when he comes home after the Chickie run. And as we were approaching doing the scene, it was beginning to get on my nerves. It was too claustrophobic. It did not help me show some of the turmoil that was in Dean at that time. I said, Jim, now here are the conditions. Now you come to your home and you have one action. You want to get upstairs without being seen, without being heard, without a confrontation. But yet you gotta spill your guts out to somebody. You have to talk to somebody. And he lies down and he hangs his head over. And I yell out, "Your mother's at the top of the stairs.
He's home.
Jimmy! Jimmy! You're home!"
Well, when I first met, I actually met Jimmy. I was to read for Nick Ray, and I went to Nick's hotel, and he introduced me to Jimmy. It was on a Sunday afternoon, and he said, "I'd just like to go over a couple of scenes." But he hadn't told me ahead of time what role he wanted me to read. So we were actually sitting on the floor, and he said, "Okay, let's read the scene." I think it was the first one was where I asked Jimmy to go home with me after the Chickie run. And I was very embarrassed, and I said, "I don't know which role you want me to read." And he said, well, he was puzzled. He said, "Which role would you like to read?" And I said, "Definitely the one of Plato." And they were both surprised because Jimmy had more lines. And I said, "Well, I just think it's a better role." And so I started reading the scene with Jimmy. And then Nick said, "All right, now let's put the script away." And he said, "Can you do improvisations?" And of course I said yes. You know, I mean, I wanted that role very badly. I had no idea what he was talking about. And I picked it up from Jimmy. I realized that Jimmy was doing the scene, but he was using different dialogue. And I realized that that's what improvisations are, that you just don't do the dialogue that's written, you make up your own dialogue. And so we improvised the sequence.
The film was shot in Santa Monica High School, with many scenes being shot at Griffith Park Planetarium in Hollywood. This location has of course been used in countless TV shows and countless films, and is included in major scenes in the films The Rocketeer in 1991 and La La Land in 2015, which makes a number of references to Rebel Without a Cause. There is even a memoriam to James Dean in Griffith Park, with a statue of James Dean's head in tribute of his memory. During the filming of Rebel Without a Cause at Griffith Park Observatory, downtown LA residents saw the bright production lights in the hills and flooded switchboards with reports of raging forest fires. After the strong sneak preview response of Rebel Without a Cause, Warner Brothers proposed a long-term contract for James Dean, but on September 30th of 1955, James Dean sadly died in an automobile accident. He was only 24. The film was released just 1 month after Dean's untimely death. It elevated his stardom and legend even after his death. Rebel Without a Cause was well received by critics and open to rave reviews. But unfortunately, comparisons were made to the film The Blackboard Jungle, which also explored troubled teenagers from a different aspect. It was feared that The Blackboard Jungle and Rebel Without a Cause would incite juvenile delinquency. Rebel Without a Cause was banned in New Zealand and the UK, and the film was stamped with an X rating and scenes were cut. The film was told to have a curse on it, mainly because the 3 main stars in the film died in a tragic way, starting with James Dean. Sal Mineo was murdered in an alley in West Hollywood in 1976, and Natalie Wood died in Catalina Bay in 1981 after falling into the water off a yacht, drowning.
I've always been terrified, still am, of water, dark water, sea water, or, river water.
Rebel Without a Cause is certainly one of the most iconic films of the 1950s and movie history. It really captured the true struggles that teenagers went through at that time. Even Elvis Presley was a huge fan of the film, calling it an enduring classic that was masterfully crafted and made. This iconic film has become a part of popular culture, even over 60 years later. My name is Jonathan. Thanks for watching.